listener production.
Hey, Bension Siebert here with The Briefing. It's been a big week of debate over the next census and a handful of questions that might or might not be added to it. If you haven't been following along every step of this saga, the background to it is this. Last year, the Australian Bureau of Statistics publicly apologised to queer Australians for not including questions about sexuality, transgender identity and intersex status in the 2021 census. The ABS acknowledged this was, quote, hurtful, confusing, demeaning and discriminatory, and it's been consulting on adding new questions to the next census ever since. Then, apparently out of the blue last week, the government announced, actually, the next census will be identical to the last one, so as to avoid a divisive debate over sexuality and gender. Since then, several Labor MPs, including the one you're about to hear from, have publicly rebelled, calling for the decision to be reversed and for queer Australians to be acknowledged in the census. And this morning, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese got on ABC radio to say there will in fact be one question about sexuality added to the next census. But if the government thinks this is the end of a divisive debate, they might have just started a new one by failing to commit to any questions about transgender or intersex Australians in the census. Josh Burns is the Labor MP for Macnamara in Melbourne. Josh, welcome to The Briefing. What's your reaction to the Prime Minister's comments this morning?
Yeah, look, it has been a big morning and it's been a big week, frankly. And I think I first want to start by saying that I know it hasn't been an easy week for a lot of people, especially members of the LGBTIQ community who, I'm so privileged to represent them, and to hear conversations about you instead of with you can often be a really difficult thing for a lot of people. And I also think the way in which some of this conversation has happened has been a little bit hurtful, and I just wanted to sort of recognise that the way we talk about this and the way we include people in our national conversation really matters. And I'm really proud to be an MP that has such a large LGBTIQ community, and I think the very bare minimum to say to someone is that you count and that you matter is a really important thing to say, plus all of the other details around the census. So I just wanted to start off by saying that however sort of stressful my week as an MP has been, I know that people at home and in our community have been pretty hurt by this, and I wanted to recognise it, and it's okay to feel a bit hurt by this because it's really understandable. Look, I obviously welcome the Prime Minister's comments this morning. There's always lots you have to deal with when you're the Prime Minister, and it's a really hard job to do so many different things in your day, but he obviously made an announcement that there will be questions around sexuality in the upcoming census, and that's something that I obviously welcome. I think it's really important to include questions along those lines, and it's a step forward, a huge step forward, and one that wasn't in the last census, and I'll leave it with my colleagues to work out the details of those questions, but obviously it's welcome.
Richard Marles said that he wanted to avoid a divisive debate. That was why these questions would not be included. Is this a backflip from the Prime Minister?
Look, it's obviously new information, and it's obviously the Prime Minister's obviously come out today and said that this is what will be happening. So I do welcome that, and that's something that I felt was important to include. I completely understand the notion that minority communities and the LGBTIQ community is used as some sort of political football, and it is weaponized, and people are used in really divisive political debates. And that's harmful. But I would also say that everyone's a person. Everyone deserves to be counted. Everyone deserves to be included and lifted up and represented by government. And government can show strength sometimes. And government can be a vehicle where people are included.
You're saying that government can show strength, but has the government lost its spine since the Voice campaign?
No, I think that there is a huge raft of reforms that are going on, and lots of which I'm extremely proud of. I mean, only last week we introduced huge bits of legislation to pay superannuation in paid parental leave. You've also got another bill that Jason Clare implemented that's going to wipe $3 billion of student debt to try and ensure that people aren't crippled by HECS debt. There is a huge agenda that's going on, and I'm really proud of a lot of that work.
But this is why I ask the question about spinelessness, because Peter Dutton was apparently going to oppose these questions in the census. Why did it take this intervention from yourself and these other backbenchers for the Prime Minister to decide, okay, we will include a question about sexuality in the census?
I'd make a couple of points, and I gently push back on one sort of premise. I mean, I've known the Prime Minister for a long time. He's been very consistent in his career about standing up for LGBTIQ people. He was moving motions in Labor Party conferences on marriage equality before it was cool, before it was something that was in the sort of social norm. He was the first Prime Minister to attend Mardi Gras in the history of our country. He has a good track record on these issues, and I think his instincts are to include people and to unify people. I've spoken to him about issues along these sorts of lines, whether it be the Scott Morrison religious discrimination bills that were extremely divisive and discriminatory. He and I had deep conversations about all of that, and I know where he's coming from, and he's coming from a place where he does want to include people. I do think that some of the specifics of the census being in 2026 and, the mechanics of government, that sometimes government is such a big piece of work that it can sometimes take a few days to iron out a little bit.
But this isn't an example of good government, is it? Because the Australian Bureau of Statistics had to apologise in 2021 to the LGBTIQA+ community because the last census was, quote, discriminatory. The ABS has been consulting with the community for years on this subject, and then seemingly out of the blue, we hear this announcement that none of these questions are going to be on the census, and then almost a week later, the Prime Minister says there will be one about sexuality. Why is the government doing policy on the run in this way?
Look, all I would say to you is that clearly I felt it was important to say something publicly. I've obviously been having a lot of conversations with LGBTIQA+ advocates, with people in my community, and I obviously wanted to ensure that they were heard inside government. And when you eventually speak out, a lot of conversations have been had internally. And I'll say this, that all of the conversations I had inside government, making representations on behalf of my community, were sincere, were genuine, and people were respectful and listening to the way in which this unfolded. So I would say to you that, yes, of course the politics of this has been a bit clunky, but I would also say that the people have taken me seriously and my colleagues seriously when we have raised issues and concerns. We want people to be included.
Can I ask you about inclusion? Because the Prime Minister said this morning that, quote, there were proposals for wide-ranging changes in the census, and that has been rejected because we think that isn't appropriate. He says that there will be one question on sexuality. Does that mean that there will be nothing in the 2026 census for trans and intersex Australians?
That's a really good question, and I think it's a really important question. The answer is I'm not sure. I obviously, I value our trans community locally. I have seen the stigma and the difficulty that our trans community has on a daily basis and the way in which they are, in particular, isolated and used as a political football. And I think that everyone deserves respect, especially our trans community. Obviously, this is, unfolding, and I'll let my colleagues work through what they feel the questions can be. But I also would say that the engagement with the trans community is really strong, and certainly I am advocating with them inside government, and there are conversations going on about how we support the trans community, how we work through a whole range of issues. I mean, the census is an important tool, but there is actually a lot more that we need to be doing to ensure that trans people have all of the different accesses to government services that can help them and that can help them overcome, what we know is a disproportionate reality where they are dealing with mental health issues that are especially affecting young trans kids, and we want to help them get through all of the different challenges that they already are facing and that they deserve to face with respect.
Well, that being the case, if the Prime Minister was trying to avoid a divisive, harmful debate, this decision saying yes to gay people, no to trans people effectively in the census, is that just going to fan the flames and make this an even more toxic debate for an even more marginalised part of the community?
let's see where we get to around what the final questions are in the census. But I would agree that we cannot, that I'm here to be a representative for my community, and that absolutely includes the trans community, and that their voice matters, representation for them matters, and ensuring that they have access to adequate government services matter across the board. And everyone deserves respect, and people deserve to be counted and to be included in government decision-making. And whatever ways in which we can do that, I'm fully supportive of.
You were lauding the Prime Minister's political career in his support of same-sex people in this country, but in making this decision, which effectively, like I said, yes to same-sex, no to transgender and intersex, what do you think that says about the Prime Minister's political judgment about Australia in this moment?
Knowing the Prime Minister, I think he wants to include people. He doesn't want people to feel isolated. Now, this week has been, obviously one where we've had pretty honest conversations internally, and all I can say from my end is that I'm proud to stand up for our LGBTIQ community. I think that everyone deserves to be included. Everyone deserves to be counted. Government services are for everyone, and that I'm the chair of the Human Rights Committee as well, Bension. And one of the things that we talk about and one of the things that we assess is that human rights are inherently belong to every single person, and every single person deserves to have the same rights before the law, and that every single person deserves to have that same dignity. That's what guides me. And, as I said to you before, I really believe that the Prime Minister is not motivated by anything other than wanting to include people, and I've seen that play out on a number of occasions. So let's see where the questions land. I don't think that has been set, but I would also say that on my role, I'll continue to advocate for the people that I'm proud to represent, and that includes absolutely the trans community.
What is your message to the Prime Minister about the inclusion of questions about transgender people and people who are intersex on the census?
Well, my message to all of my colleagues and to the country and to all of my community is that everyone matters, and everyone counts, and everyone deserves to have respect and to be included and to be a part of our Australian community.
Is it the wrong decision?
As I said, let's see where the decision lies and let's see where we land. I'll let others work through some of those details. I know that LGBTIQ groups are at the table, working with government and working through these matters and working through how we support communities and how we include communities and how expert advice is given to government.
Hasn't the Prime Minister already said this is the decision? There will be one question about sexuality, and you're saying, well, let's keep it open because you want other questions to be in there as well.
What I'm saying is that the question hasn't been finalised, and what that question looks like is, obviously something that the government has to look at, and how we include people is really important.
Finally, there are people listening to this who would either say, we don't think that these questions are appropriate for the census at all, or they would say, there's a cost of living crisis, there's a housing crisis. Why are you people focused on the 2026 census all this week? What's your message to those people?
Well, there is a cost of living crisis, and that has been the primary focus of our work. But I thought it was important this week because people were obviously hurt by the way in which this conversation was unfolding. And I think that the number one focus of government absolutely is cost of living, and to ensure that we use the levers to make Australians be able to get through the week and get through the month and get through the year. But it's also okay to recognise the fact that people are hurting. And in my philosophy, the way in which we are at our best, and my role that I feel as a representative of the people of Macnamara, is to at times recognise when people are feeling hurt or let down by government, and to represent my community in the best way I possibly can. There's still a lot more work to be done, as this conversation has clearly demonstrated, but I'll continue to stand up for the people who matter, and the LGBTIQ community in my community matter. And I'm proud to be their representative.
Josh Burns, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Pleasure.
Josh Burns there. That's it for this episode of The Briefing. And as always, if there's someone you think might be interested in this ep, why not send them a link? If you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast, and on TikTok and YouTube, just search Listener Newsroom. That's it from me, but check back in your feed tomorrow for a very personal conversation between Antoinette Lattouf and now independent Senator Fatima Payman. She was pulled into the spotlight over a conscience confidence vote and dramatically left the Labor Party earlier this year.
It shouldn't have ended this way, for me at least, and for the Labor Party, but just to see that rules that were made 130 years ago is a lot more important to the Labor Party than reflecting the realities and the communities on the ground, that we try to embrace the multiculturalism, but it appears to be just confetti that we love to sprinkle around and photo ops that we love to take.
I'm Bension Siebert. Happy Friday and see you next time.